Hello all, Maureen Curry back again. Week 3 begins this week. We're going to be studying the early Christian period and Byzantine architecture, and we're also going to see how the influences of Islamic art and architecture carried over into the Christian buildings and motifs. So the first Christian emperor was Constantine I. We have a picture of him there in the bottom corner. His statue was a gigantic statue. But anyway, he was the first Christian emperor. He was established the new religious tolerance. Christianity had been growing. So the Roman Empire now will be changing, will be coming more Christians, and of course buildings, art, and architecture would have to reflect the needs of the new Christian society. So Constantine established a new imperial residence in Byzantium, which he renamed as Constantinople, which is today, present-day Istanbul in Turkey. Constantinople was the crossroads of Europe, North Africa, and Asia, so a lot of travel was going on, a lot of Roman taxation was going on. The empire still was very wide, and there were a lot of different diverse ethnic groups. There were the Armenians, the Greeks, the Italians, Slavs, Egyptians, Jews, Arabs, and others. Greek was the official language of Byzantium. As far as political status goes, the Byzantine emperors considered themselves ruling under the protection of God. They also used art and architecture to promote the political image and to continue the power of the empire. They built walls, road systems, same public spaces, water supplies, same as we saw in the early Roman Empire. We're also going to meet, I'm going to move this down a little bit, Justinian, Emperor Justinian. He reestablished the power of the old Roman Empire, and he administered his rule from Constantinople. He established the Orthodox Christianity. He also was a major patron of buildings. He's known for the Hagia Sophia, large building. Sometimes it's a church, established as a church, then it became a mosque, then it went back to a church, and now I believe it's a museum. Anyway, his building was called building period was called Golden Age of Justinian. In Byzantine architecture, you're going to see the use of massive domes and some unique vaulting, pointed arches, and the large domes were supported by a technique called pendentives and squinches. You'll learn about that this week. The walls of the buildings were decorated in all over surface detail of mosaics, some frescoes, some painted iconography as well. Usually these images were sacred images, and people believed the iconography, the images, had powers to heal, miraculous powers. As I mentioned before, the Byzantine Empire was a cultural mix of Roman, Christian, and Eastern influences. As far as art goes, figures are going to look a little different. They're going to appear flat, frontal. They'll seem to float above the ground line. You'll see that. And as I said before, the walls were covered with many precious golden mosaic stones, tiny stones called tesserae, which were glued to the wall and formed images and also looked very otherworldly, very heavenly, very glittering. Architecture was characterized by dome-covered circular plan churches. Also, the Roman Basilica was utilized, and the same rectangular plan with a huge dome up above. Decorative arts were often ivory. Sometimes they were religious worship objects, like a hinged prayer altar pieces. Here's an example of the Byzantine luxury art of ivory. You can see they could carve ivory in very realistic ways. Here we see the St. Michael image, but you can see the proportions are sort of odd. The figure looks very large for this architectural space, very frontal. Even the feet are a little strange. Anyway, another example of Justinian as a world conqueror carved in ivory. So you can see this would be a decorative object that they would be admire. Usually the motifs were started out as pagan motifs, but then translated into Christian motifs. Sometimes you see a combination of both. As far as the Byzantine art, we're still seeing the ivory carving here, an example of that again. Byzantine architecture is driven by that iconography. I mentioned before that Justinian was the patron of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, and also the Church of San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy. The main characteristics of Byzantine churches are those dome over a square, dome-covered spaces, and they're supported by pendentives and squinches. Pendere in Italian, Latin means to hang. So you can see here's an example of how the dome was placed on a rounded-shaped pendentives to support the dome itself. And here is the dome on a square, and then the squinches were a little bit more blocky to support the dome. Another example of pendentives and squinches. You will need to know these terms for this week. Inspiration from Islamic cultures was brought to the Christian architects and from the Crusades. They saw these pointed arches in the Islamic lands, the dome-covered spaces. They also saw a lot of all-over surface detail, geometric decoration, vegetal decoration. They carried that into their buildings as well. Here's the Church of Hagia Sophia, or Holy Wisdom, established by Justinian. You can see later on it became a mosque when they added the Ottoman Turks added the minarets. But you can see that large dome-covered space, and then of course the clear-story windows, the ring of windows at the base of the dome. So Justinian built this monumental church. The dimensions are mentioned there. I talked before about that clear-story ring of clear-story windows to allow light to come into the space, and you can imagine this whole surface of all these walls were covered with golden mosaics. So when those light came in from those windows and other windows, the whole building just glittered. Here's the dome over the square using the pendentive system you can see here, and then the golden mosaics in the Church of San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy. Emperor Justinian, he was a patron for this church, although they say he never went there, but it was an octagon-shaped design. So octagon forming a dome over a space. So it's sort of the octagon formed two concentric circles, you can see, with the dome in the center covering the space, and then the processional area of space for chapels and service. And of course, this area would be the apse. This is a picture of the interior mosaic program of San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy. And you can see the all-over surface detail of the mosaics. There's a major mosaic program in San Vitale. It was a place where Justinian and his wife have major mosaics that were placed on the wall, on the side walls, and in the dome-covered space was the image of Christ. So they're worthy to be in this sacred space with Christ. It was a very political mosaic, legitimizing Justinian's rule. Once again, more images of the mosaic program in San Vitale. Here's Justinian in the center of the mosaics here with his attendants, and it's like he's the priest. He's bringing the Eucharistic bread, a procession. His soldiers on the left here have the Christian symbol, the Cairo symbol. So the Justinian mosaics were very important for legitimizing the emperor and the work he did to be a patron of the church and promote the Christian faith. Here's the image of his Theodora mosaic, his wife, the empress. So she's also considered worthy to be in the church like that. wall images, icons are very much a part of Byzantine art and Eastern Orthodox faith practice as well. So you'll see a lot of golden mosaics on the walls of the buildings. Usually, quite often, Mary, the Mother of God, received quite a lot of recognition, and worship. Devotion to Mary was very important in the Greek Orthodox churches. So here's the golden mosaics that were left on the walls of Hagia Sophia. Most of the mosaics were whitewashed when the building was turned into a mosque. Another golden mosaic from Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. We see here Christ in the middle with Emperor on the left and the Empress on his right. So here the king and queen were worthy to be in the presence, the image of Christ. Most Byzantine architecture is based on the central plan. The center is covered by a large, massive dome, usually supported by either squinches or pendentives. Some more images of the peering up into the dome-covered space is very typical of Byzantine architecture, and the dome on the cube, on a drum, usually in the center of the church over the altar. You can see what it looks like. Very powerful to see, and they're all covered with golden mosaics. St. Mark's in Venice, Italy, for anybody has traveled, that's a Byzantine church, and you can see that all over golden mosaics were just so much a part of Byzantine architecture. The Normans also in Sicily, they followed suit with Byzantine mosaics on the wall and the same kind of program of Christ, large Christ in the center of the apse, and the Virgin Mary also shown, and a lot of all over surface detail. Wall painting, frescoes was also used. Of course, religious themes were dominant. The late Byzantine period, the Byzantine Orthodox Church began to decline. The Crusades were changing the movement and the struggles with the Ottoman Turks. So you can see that the empire is not going to be as powerful, and the Roman Empire in general is starting to disintegrate. Fresco painting was also part of the Byzantine art and continued up to the Renaissance, and we also see that in the Renaissance. This is very unique painting, wall painting, Byzantine art. So Byzantine art, the empire exerts significant influence on European art, particularly with the dome-covered spaces and the golden mosaics covering the walls. When you look at Byzantine images of figures, are usually flat and frontal. They seem to float above the ground line. The Byzantine architects used the major pendentive support system to place those huge domes over a rectangular base. And of course, the Byzantine domes were also continued to be used by Islamic leaders and in their future mosques. So we'll be looking at mosques and Islamic architecture as well today. And remember that art represented very strong feelings about the images. Some people in Byzantine art worship the images as though they were talking to the figures themselves. So for week 3, we are going to learn about the Byzantine art and architecture. We're going to recognize how golden mosaics were used and huge dome-covered spaces were incorporated into the architecture for the discussion board this week. We're going to talk about decorating in Islamic culture and how the all-over surface detail is still very important. Geometric designs as well as vegetal and calligraphy, often typical of Islamic culture if you're going to be working on interior decorating today for an Islamic client. So as far as the assignment to be that discussion board, due Thursday and then responses due Saturday. For the written assignment, there's a a large review of the terms from ancient Greece, Rome, and the early Christian and Byzantine periods. So if you go through those terms, you'll be prepared for the first exam. So here's wishing you all the best, and I will see you in class.